we are talking about the role of top management. From the perspective of ISO 14971, requirements are very, very clear. Top management is responsible to provide sufficient resources and competent personnel. They're also responsible to establish a policy for acceptability of risk from the criteria point of view. And they are expected to review the suitability of the process to make sure it is effective. Hello everyone, and welcome once again to our weekly live discussion. I'm so glad to be with you, and I hope all of you are doing well today. So today we are going to be talking about the role of top management in the risk management process. Now this topic was suggested to me by one of our prior attendees, and I really appreciate that. So at the end of today's discussion also, you will receive a one-question brief survey inviting you to share topics or questions that are of interest to you, because that is the whole purpose of these live discussions, is to select a topic or a question that is of interest to you and talk about that topic in a general way. These sessions are not meant to be lectures or webinars. Our purpose here is to basically learn from each other. What are the common challenges? What are some of the best practices? So I know all of you have a lot of experience in the industry. You have your own insights. And I invite you to participate in the discussion in the Q&A box. The purpose of that box is not just to ask questions, but also to share comments and your own insights. So I really would like to invite you to make this as interactive as possible. Anytime, feel free to add a comment or a question, a new perspective. All of us can learn from that. And as if you have attended in the past, you know that I pause and read every comment and question that is posted in that box. So make sure that you are participating and sharing your own perspective as well. So, well, colleagues, before I get started, I just want to share with you 2 quick points for housekeeping. These are extremely quick, and I want to get them out of the way as soon as possible, right? So first, this session is being recorded. And the reason for that is we want to be able to share this knowledge and this discussion broadly and really help everyone out in the industry. The second point is that nothing we discuss in these discussions should be taken as regulatory advice. That is not the purpose. So now with that, we're going to focus on the top management responsibility and the role of top management in the risk management process. So I did a quick survey on LinkedIn. The poll is still on, and over 80 people have already voted. And I asked a very simple question. To what degree do you agree with the following statement? And the statement was, our top management is fully aware of their role in the risk management process. And there were 4 choices: strongly disagree, somewhat disagree, somewhat agree, and strongly agree. It seems that around 55% of the respondents so far have already expressed their opinion that in their view, their top management is not fully aware. So they either somewhat disagree or strongly disagree with the statement. And only 20% are saying they strongly agree with the statement that their top management is fully aware of their role. So as you can see, this is a pretty big problem, because the ISO 14971 standard is very, very clear about top management responsibility. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But if more than 50% of our colleagues are feeling that their top management is not fully aware of their role, then it could be a symptom of a problem. And we have to pay attention to that. So it's important for us to discuss this topic. In the meantime, I would like you to really share your comments and opinions. If you did not get a chance to participate in that poll, let me know what your opinion is. So let's first talk about that. And the question that comes to mind is, who is top management? Who are we talking about? Right? This term is defined in ISO 14971 quite clearly. But again, I would love to hear from you. What is your view on who the top management is as far as relevance to risk management is concerned? Now, in many cases, risk management is part of the quality management system. So that's a bigger picture, bigger umbrella. So in that case, the question is still relevant. Who's top management from the perspective of the quality management system, which does involve the risk management process? That's question number one. And if you look at the guidance, ISO TR 24971, that's a little bit more detailed and more clear on this. And really, the top management is anyone or any group of people who are directly responsible and involved in setting priorities, assigning resources, including budget and people. In a large organization, you might have many different business units. Many different people might be involved at the management level. So who is top management as far as the risk management process or quality management system is concerned? I think that's really a very important question we should clarify and understand. Preferably even define it in our risk management procedures. Because 14971 is pretty clear about what the top management responsibility is, right? And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about what the requirements are. And at a high level, these requirements are actually quite simple and straightforward. Top management is required to provide evidence of their commitment to the risk management process by providing adequate resources and competent professionals. So adequate resources, competent people. That's top. Second, they're also required to establish a policy for criteria of risk acceptability. And third, they're responsible for reviewing and evaluating the suitability and effectiveness. So it's pretty straightforward, right? The most important part is they are really, in the view of the standard, the final authority to make sure that the process is suitable and effective. And one way to ensure that is you have good resources, sufficient resources, and competent people. And that's how they show their commitment. So does the top management understand that it is their role to evaluate suitability and effectiveness? And how would they know? What kind of information would they need to be able to make that judgment? Most importantly, how would they know if the process is not effective? Would we wait for a market event to happen? Would we wait for a massive recall to deal with, to really appreciate that our process is probably not effective and needs some help? So what could we do proactively, right? And I think that's where we should talk about in terms of the role of the top management, not really from the perspective of compliance, in my opinion, but from the perspective of what it is that we would expect them to do, and whether they understand whether that is their role, whether they are really accountable for that outcome or not. So let me pick a question that was submitted as part of registration, which also I encourage very strongly for all of you to submit a question or a comment as part of registration, and I pay attention to that. So here's one question that came along. Does top management have to be actively involved with the whole risk management process or only with the risk management review? So let's take a step back, right? What do we expect them to do at the end of the day? We expect them to provide sufficient resources and personnel, but at the end of the day, they are accountable for reviewing the suitability and effectiveness of the process, right? So their level of involvement depends upon the level of resources and competent people provided who will bring them that information back. If you don't have sufficient resources, we would expect them to be involved a little bit more hands-on. And that might be a situation in many small to mid-sized organizations where, everybody is involved in everything. So the level of involvement will depend upon the kind of information they need back to make an assessment about the suitability and effectiveness. That's the way I would address that situation. And the second part of that question is risk management review. Now there are two types of reviews, just to recap. One review is at the medical device level as part of the risk management plan as an outcome of that, to close out all the activities, make an assessment whether the overall risk is acceptable, evaluate post-production plans in place, and that happens before commercialization. The second kind of review we are talking about is at the process level, which could be combined with a management review, for example. So the level of top management involvement will depend upon the kind of information that they are receiving back from the process, people involved in that process. And let's talk more about that in just a minute, because I see a few questions and comments appear here. Bijan, you are sharing that let's talk about top management for a multinational large corporation with many business units. Okay, so key question to answer: is the risk management process an enterprise-wide process which is followed by everybody to the same level of detail, is the same procedure? Or is that more of a policy kind of a document at the higher level that leads into business unit level risk management procedures? Generally, that is what I have seen in my experience. I have worked for large corporations with many different business units. There's an overall sort of a policy level document that should guide our business unit risk management procedure. So in this scenario, the business unit level top management who is responsible for that risk management procedure or a quality management procedure would be considered as top management. Now, even at a business unit level, I worked in a $4 billion organization, which had many different top management levels, right? Many of the responsibilities were delegated. A lot of the risk management function was being performed by the quality organization. So it might have to be a matrix type of a system in which you pick and choose who the members of what I would call a steering committee are. And that would be your top management. Before I forget, I want to emphasize one key point which I have seen in my experience not happen many times is we sometimes forget that the medical safety function, whatever you might want to call it, medical safety function has a key role to play in the risk management process, right? So ideally, some high-level person who has oversight over medical safety resources and budget should also be part of that steering committee to evaluate effectiveness. So I didn't want to forget that point. So Bijan, thank you for bringing that up. If you guys have experienced something different in a large organizations, please add that to the comments. John, you are sharing that you would expect top management to track appropriate metrics and drive organization leaning improvement through these. You're also sharing that part of the issue here is on the ground leadership knowing how to engage top management, what to engage them in. These 2 points are related. What metrics to measure? What information to bring back to the top management? So at the ground level, if by that you mean functional heads, John, people responsible for functional organizations, for example, R&D or engineering or manufacturing, each one of those organizations will have their own management structure. Functional heads are more directly involved in the process because they control people. They also control some resources for their departments. So they are involved. Now, it is collectively all of our responsibility to produce information that will allow the right decisions to be made, right evaluation to be done at the management review level, at the process review level. So what metrics to choose? It's up to us, I believe, to figure out the most powerful metrics. Remember, what we measure gets done. And if we measure the wrong thing, wrong things will get done and wrong decisions will be made. So yes, the metrics should be appropriate and we should have a strong role to play in that. But in that situation, my perspective is that we have to play a much bigger role, even though we may not be part of top management, but we really have to play a much bigger role in facilitating this awareness, this responsibility, and this ownership at the top level so that they are fully aware of what needs to be done. And ideally, we should be making actually a summary of all of our findings and presenting to them our assessment whether we believe the process is effective or not. We cannot really expect them to have all the details available to them. We have to analyze the data. So you're sharing here, Saeed, I've experienced that companies have risk management board who review the process, post-market board, any pre-market high risks, yes. So there is a board. There's a risk management board. You might call it a steering committee. It could be a general, an overall group which is also doing your management review. In my experience, our management review was really led by functional heads, but at the top, the CEO of our business unit was present, and it was their signature on the management review report that counted. So they were directly involved. Now, do we expect them to just make a quick assessment on the spot without providing the right information in the right format, in the right framework? Probably not, because they would not be able to say yes or no whether this process is working or not, right? So upfront, maybe one of the things we need to do is to work with them to agree upon a framework of measurement. What metrics would be appropriate? And how would we measure? What is the right frequency, right? Now, I'll also share with you that, and I don't know what your experience is, but many times I have seen top management to be quite surprised when all the functional heads are now going up to them and saying, we have to issue a recall. There's a safety issue. So they're surprised. They are not fully engaged. They're not fully aware. Maybe not all the information is bubbling up to them. And in that circumstance, would we expect them to say our process is effective? Probably not. So they have to take responsibility and hold the functional heads accountable for that as well. So in big organizations, it's a very complex dynamic. It's a very complex structure. In smaller organizations, the so-called top management may be very involved, hands-on, and they may be dealing with a lot of different situations and requirements. They might have many different opinions and views formed already along the way. But in large organizations, it gets complex. And many of us, I believe, are in the large organizations. So I think we have to take ownership. If we are involved in the risk management process, my view is that we have to drive that conversation. And we should not take no for an answer. And we should convince ourselves that our top management indeed is engaged. And we have made sure that they are engaged. And we ask them the tough questions, right? They ask us the tough questions. If we present information that indicates the process is not effective, I'm sure they're going to turn around and ask, okay, Naveen, you brought me this information. What do you think we should be doing? So we need to go back to those conversations with a proposal. It's our ownership as well, even though the standard says top management. Saeed, you are saying the biggest gap I've experienced in organizations is no risk acceptability policy. So we don't have a clear acceptability policy is what I'm reading in that comment. So yes, so now let's play back that scenario again. If we have not established an acceptability policy for criteria of risk acceptability, then we should identify that gap right away. And we should bring it forward with a proposal of what that policy should look like. We should review it with the top management and get their buy-in, get their sign-off. Because at the end of the day, they are accountable for the effectiveness. If we are making a statement in our risk management report that our overall residual risk is acceptable, we are relying on a criteria. And if that criteria is not signed off by the top management, we are probably not being responsible in our own responsibility. That's, again, I'm sharing with you my view. So I want us to take ownership, not say, hey, our top management is not aware. Well, it's a big problem. Let's do something about that, right? We have to do something about that. Okay, so there was another question that was submitted related to the policy. And I will read this question to you. I would be interested to understand the practice of drafting, defining a framework of risk acceptability criteria within the risk management policy defined by top management. Very, very good question. In ISO TR 24971, in Annex C, there's a lot of guidance on what that policy could look like. What should it be based on? What should be the key elements? And the bottom line is this, and I talk about that in a lot more detail in my live training course. I'm going to share that information with you because I've also actually shared with you a free video lesson, a 15-minute lesson on top management responsibility, because I think this should be freely available to everybody. This is the most important thing we can do as professionals of risk management. So that lesson is freely available to you. I'll share a link with you. So it's very simple. Really, the framework is very, very simple. Bottom line is it should be kept simple so people can understand it, right? It should be based on regulatory requirements, stakeholder concerns, standards, state of the art, keeping all that into view. It should have a clear purpose, scope, but most importantly is your approach to risk control. I think that is where the most important element is of the policy. How do you decide when to stop? That is the most important element. And again, that free lesson on my website will give you a lot of information about that. But again, please share your view, what the policy should include and how it should work. One of the things I tell people is that there's no requirement for you to have a standalone policy for risk acceptability. No requirement. If you have a QMS in place, I'm sure you have a quality policy, right? It is very appropriate to integrate the requirements for the risk acceptability policy with your quality policy. In general, I would expect the quality policy to address stakeholder concerns, to address regulatory requirements, to make sure all the processes are carried out in a controlled way, efficient way, and they are effective. It may not have a very specific requirement about the risk control criteria, and maybe that's a good way to enhance it. So that is kind of my view and perspective. I like to keep things simple. You don't have to specify criteria in your policy. You have to provide a framework. And the bottom line is the policy should be easy and simple to remember, right? It should not be so detailed that you have to refer to a piece of paper every time you try to figure out what the policy is. But that should guide specific decisions at the medical device level, which you must document in the risk management plan. So that's probably what I would kind of share with you based on my perspective on and view. But again, please share your opinion. So again, we are coming kind of close to our end time. Let me quickly summarize this. Again, we are talking about the role of top management. From the perspective of ISO 14971, requirements are very, very clear. Top management is responsible to provide sufficient resources and competent personnel. They're also responsible to establish a policy for acceptability of risk from the criteria point of view. And they are expected to review the suitability of the process to make sure it is effective. We have talked about effectiveness of risk management in previous discussions. That's an important question to answer. And we cannot answer that question if we don't know what we are measuring. A clue to you guys is that read clause 4.1 in ISO 14971, and the first part of that clause actually gives you a clue about what to measure as far as the purpose of risk management is concerned. So we'll talk more about that in future sessions if you guys are interested, but continue sharing your ideas and questions and comments through these conversations. Finally, I want to emphasize again, really all of us who are involved in the risk management process and are very passionate about this, I would encourage you to take ownership, to feel responsible, and to feel empowered to make a change. If you believe, like the 55% of the people who are responding to my survey, if you believe that your top management is not fully aware, I think we have to drive that conversation. We can't stop because it's too important. We don't want our top management to be surprised. I know nobody likes to hear bad news, but most importantly, nobody likes to be surprised. I think that's the most important part. Bad news happens all the time, but they don't want to be surprised. So that should be our attitude. That should show our passion, our commitment, and we have to pull them in if they are not engaged. Ask for it. We all need it. So I hope you like it. Let me share with you very quickly the link to my my online course. Again, what I want to show you more, this is just launching. The next live session going to be starting in January 2023. Here is a free lesson on management responsibility. Anyone can view it. You don't have to sign up for the course to view this lesson. I think it's too important for us to ignore, and I want to do my part to promote this knowledge and understanding. But if you are interested in signing up for this course, good news is that I'm offering a $100 discount if you register before the end of this month. So I hope that will be useful to you, and you will for sure view the free lesson on your at whenever convenient to you. It's available to you, and you can review that. Let me know if you have other thoughts, questions, comments, and perspectives to share. Stay engaged. Share your comments and opinions. I post a lot of thoughts and views and perspectives on LinkedIn, and I invite you to engage with me in your comments and share with me what your perspective is, what your view is. So guys, with that, I want to close our conversation today. I don't see any other pending questions and comments. Well, there is one more here. Okay, Dignesh, you are saying, thank you for the wonderful discussion. Very informative. Thank you, Dignesh, for attending and also suggesting topics. So keep doing that, guys. You're going to receive a quick survey. Please let me know what kind of topics and questions are of interest to you, because that's my whole focus. We're going to pick them one by one and discuss and share our perspective and learn from each other. So with that, thank you again for joining today, and I wish you guys a very good week ahead. So next week we're going to be talking about the link between risk management and design controls. I think that's also a very important topic, and many people are interested in that. So we'll talk about that. But after that, we will take a little break and come back in January. So guys, have a good week ahead. Stay engaged, stay connected, and let's all work together to take risk management to the next level in our organizations. We all need it. Thank you again.